Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Professor Hamamoto, and the time is 4 p.m. on Sunday, April 27, year 2025. And today's talk is multi part, and it was going to focus, first of all, on this concept of dark tourism, but I thought I would leave that for the end, or perhaps even move that talk to next week or some other future date and go right into the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995 straight away because it's around the 30th year anniversary of the bombing. The anniversary was, I think, maybe about 5 days a week, 7 days a week, 7 days ago, something like that. I might be wrong by a couple of days, but it's roughly 30 years. And I it came to my realization that a lot of people weren't born or they were very young, and much of the American population or the world population might have forgotten the importance of this singular event in American history, this singular event in world history, really, which was blamed on a single individual by the name of Timothy McVeigh. Some of you may remember that. And as it turns out, and this is on the basis of extensive reading that I've done over the years, and I'm going to be looking at a couple of key texts today. They're part of the recommended reading if you can find the books, because not surprisingly, both of the main texts are now out of print. So when I mention a certain title, you might want to pick it up before it disappears into the memory hole. But I've done extensive reading and I realized that, my gosh, personally, I have been engaged in, without knowing it, this exercise in dark tourism for most of my adult life. And those of you who have similar interests, it may not be a professional one, maybe a casual one, make that comment down below. Have you, for example, you, the listener, have you visited the Oklahoma City Museum and Memorial in Oklahoma City, where the Alfred P. Federal Building once stood before it wasn't taken down, but it was much of it was destroyed, supposedly by an ammonium nitrate bomb. And you can hear the skepticism in my voice because, according to any number of institutional authorities as well as individual experts, professionals, they don't agree with that characterization. Just in similar situation, you have experts disagreeing about the causes of the demolition of the World Trade Centers, which includes, of course, Building 7. And given the span of time that has elapsed, we're beginning to now put together certain patterns as they have been put into play by the subterranean controllers of the United States government and the world system. These covert entities, many of them hiding in plain sight, they have initials that they go by that most people can recognize just like that. There's an entire popular culture industry centered around them. Spy versus spy, movies, James Bond, secret agents, terrorism. And some of the top stars of the present day, Matt Damon, you name it, have risen to prominence on this whole industry that has been created to obfuscate, to occlude some painful historical truths about government, whether it's U.S. government or any government. I think these insights will have application to any number of scenarios, the 7/7 events, the bombings in London, for example, any number of them, right? The USS the Pueblo in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, on and on and on. These are called, as you know by now, false flag scenarios. I'm going to try to avoid these terms because they're so well known now that there's a tendency to just shut off when you hear them because you think you know it, but you don't. I don't, right? And that's the function of your Joe Rogans, Candace Owens, Ian Carroll. These are the people who have been put out there to inundate the public with all these familiar names, institutions, and scenarios so that we think that we've come to a full realization, a full understanding of what these scenarios represent. In our mind, we say to ourselves, okay, case closed. But no, as I mentioned before, it's more like an open-ended opera, as Professore Umberto Eco, as he put it, as he expressed it. The fat lady doesn't come out at the end to sing. It's an open opera. And it operates on a huge, grand stage. And it includes a lot of seemingly little people who populate the scenery. And they call them non-playing, role-playing actors, but they are significant, right? So first of all, let me introduce the two primary texts of the day, and I'll give you a little bit of the book history behind these. This is called, I don't know if you can see it, so I'll read it. Get bad reflection problems here. I'll just read it. And you can't find it on the retailer that ate the earth. You might find it in the used market. Fortunately, I've bought about 3 or 4 copies over the years. And each time I make a purchase, the price gets higher and higher. I bought this book for today's talk, and I paid quite a lot of money for it. But when I first got it, I got it at the basic retail price. I think it was, $20, something like that. So you can find them online. If you can, after the show, get yourself a copy. This belongs in your library if you're a serious student of the crypto history, of the hidden history of the New World Order. But the title of it, since it's not showing up on the monitor here, the title of the book is The Oklahoma City Bombing and the Politics of Terror. Remember the second part. There's a political agenda behind terrorism. Not only are these not one-offs, one of a kind, not only are these not the product of a single deranged or ideologically warped individual, but it's part of a larger state terrorist agenda that's very much with us here in 2025. And if you haven't figured it out by now, one of the reasons why I'm addressing this topic is that don't rule out the possibility of yet another large-scale terror attack on the U.S. homeland, because certain circumstances are in alignment that seem to indicate that there's a possibility. This is not a prediction, but there's a possibility that a certain event or big wedding, as it's been called in code, is in the offing. We had a recent, quote unquote, unliving of a prominent whistleblower, if you could call her that. She was a plaintiff of a lawsuit of a certain individual who was in prison for his crimes. and died in prison. No names here, and she turned up dead a couple of days ago. And if you want to see more about that, I think the best reportage that I've seen so far was done by my friend and colleague over in London, Sean Atwood. And those shows are still on YouTube since I last checked. So you might want to watch those as soon as possible before they disappear, or download them for archival purposes. Right? That's my recommendation. So you can review it later. And this book is by a journalist called David Hoffman. Now, do not confuse him with another David Hoffman. I think he goes by David F. Hoffman. He is a mainstream legacy journalist, right? I don't know if that's his real name or not. I don't know whether he was brought forward to sort of muddy the waters, to provide an artificial double so people are confused, but that happens sometimes. And by the way, the forward to this book, which again is no longer available, I'll tell you why in a moment, is by a former Congressman, Charles Key. And I mention this is because not a few of you, including people who support me on this channel, even on my Patreon, have this defeatist attitude that nothing's going to change. That so what? You know, even if the FBI releases every file that we've been clamoring for years and years, that nothing's going to change. Well, this is just one example of an elected official who came forward and said, no, the official story, the legacy media cover-up of the Oklahoma City bombing is false. And this cries out for further investigation. So this is one of our elected officials. They're not all bad. Now, the good ones are in the minority, but their numbers are growing. And we're already seeing changes at the highest level of the federal government. I think that's going to have an impact on state level government and municipal government. It's not going to happen overnight. And it's definitely not going to happen if you're one of those losers with a defeatist attitude, just sitting back on the sideline saying, well, come on, hurry up, put it out. And you're doing nothing except jacking your jaws about how other people are not doing their job. Well, you're not you who are watching this show, because I don't think there's a crossover in the audience here, but most other people, millions, in fact, are watching Joe Rogan because it's entertainment. Isn't that what he is? He's a compere. He's a DJ. He's a host. He's a stand-up comedian. Okay, I'm not going to go on that ranting. You've heard me enough doing that. But I have to remind people that this is not entertainment. This is our lives. This is the health of the American Republic. This is the peace and security of the world system that we're talking about writ large, right? And it starts on these small, seemingly small by comparison, events. So my job is to unpack them, to provide you hard information, as well as to raise questions for further investigation, and also to introduce you into some of the less popular books, right? Such as the ones that disappeared mysteriously. So let me move on to a brief discussion of what happened in this book. Well, by David Hoffman, the real David Hoffman. There was a lawsuit. I have a copy here. I'll put it on my Patreon for those of you who want to research this further. There was a lawsuit that was filed and decided back in 2002. By the way, this is another example of how there's some elements of our government that not only are functional, but they're highly functional. This is the case where the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was upheld, okay? I have to remind people of this because we've been oppressed and beat upon for so long that we have sort of a defeatist attitude, a loser attitude. This is the United States of America. This is not one of them traditional societies where they've lived under these oppressive conditions for millennia. And freedom is part of our legacy. And we're going to lose it because of defeatist attitudes. The hang down people, the shoegazers, right? I'm sorry, I'm really becoming irritated by these people who keep nagging. Oh, Pam Bondi needs to do this, she needs to do that, or blah 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 is not doing his job. Come on. Here's an example where a judge ruled in favor of David Hoffman, saying that he was not guilty as accused of, let's see, what are the exact charges here? Well, let me read you. Oh, it's a libel. He sued him for libel. But the problem is the guy who sued him for libel was a quote unquote former FBI official, high level official. And the judge decided in his written statement that, well, at the time he wasn't a former FBI official, he was an official. So at the time that this story, his involvement with the Oklahoma City bombing investigation and prior knowledge of it covered the time that he was a government official, a public figure as well. In America, in the United States, if you are a public figure, you are fair game so far as investigation is concerned. And there's other principles, secondary and tertiary principles, but the other main principle that was decided by this lawsuit is that David Hoffman did not intentionally malign this former FBI official, not intentionally. There was no malice aforethought. So he got off on that. And this is, according to the judge, who said, I'm quoting, says the author did not know the falsity of the statements made, and that the notion of the reckless disregard for the truth was thrown out. Anyway, it's a long lawsuit. I'll let you read it. But the problem is that before the lawsuit was decided in the favor of David Hoffman, the government or some other agency bought most of the inventory of this book, which was published by Feral House, Feral, Feral House, which used to be published, I think, headquartered in Los Angeles, Venice, more specific. That's when I vaguely remember first coming across that publisher. And it stuck out with me because there weren't any indie publishers back then of books. Now they're all over the place, right? The bar has lowered, and there are new established ones like publishers like Skyhorse and other, but really, really grassroots indie publishing was a rarity. And Feral House was one of them. So I was very impressed by I have several of their early books. The publisher of and I guess he was the owner of Feral House, subsequently died. Maybe that needs to be looked into. And the headquarters were moved up, I think, to Washington, the state of Washington, something like that. And I tried to make some inquiries there, and I could tell that they were no longer interested in this type of work. So I think the Feral House might have changed hands. So that's another reason why it's going to be a miracle if this book is ever republished by Feral House. It should be, though. If not Feral House, some other enterprising it's not going to be me, but some other enterprising publisher should buy the rights to this and put it back out. Now, Before this court decision was decided, the publisher, Feral House, agreed to pulp their existing their inventory. So except for the people who are on the ground floor like me, who bought the book right away or have been picking them up on the used market at increasingly higher prices, this book is out of print. It not only is it out of print, it's missing, it's gone. You might find it at some university library. I know I found it at my university library. Although they tend not to buy quote unquote conspiracy books. That's why you have to buy them yourself. And you're certainly not going to find them in the public library, the one in your neighborhood. But universities might do it depending on who the librarian is. So that leaves it for us to be the archivists for this type of work. We'll get more into this book in a moment. We're going to talk about some very familiar names. And again, don't jump to the conclusion that you know everything there is to know about MK Ultra just because I utter that. Just because you're a big follower, not you, of Candace Owens or Ian Carroll or Joe or whoever else, there's going to be some Nepo baby that's going to be the next big revealer of the great dark truths of the so-called deep state. And I have a problem with that concept of deep state. There's nothing deep about it at all. It is a state, but is it the American state? I don't think so. You might assume it's more like an extension of the British secret state. Has nothing to do with America. That's more of a subtle argument that I can talk about later. The second book I've already introduced to you in a previous talk, but I'm returning to it today because he devotes an entire chapter to this theme of the Oklahoma City bombing, and that's the one and only Victor Thorne, again, deceased. I devoted a whole talk on the circumstances of his death, supposedly self-inflicted gunshot wound. So you remember this book, Hillary and Bill. It's a 3-volume set. This is I think, volume number 2. It's the murder volume. And there's 3. One's murder, one's sex, and I think the third one is drugs. But I have all 3. I have multiple sets, in fact. Again, because I was an early adopter, I know these books don't last, especially the real incendiary ones. Jump on it right away and get these books. I often will list them in my X account. I'll put a little link there for you to jump on it and buy it. And I don't have any stock in the retailer that bought the world, but let's use it for what benefit it does provide us, and that's to get out this information to our hands where we can use it. So it's by Victor Thorne, and it's part 3 of what he calls the Clinton trilogy. Remember, who was president of the United States when the Oklahoma City bombing went down? None other than William Jefferson Clinton. And we're going to be talking about the motives behind the bombing in a moment. So hang on. And another book, I just checked, is still in print. It's listed in the link below. Pick up your copy. And it's written by, he says he's a medical doctor. His name's John Hall. I haven't been able to find out if his bona fides check out, but I'll leave that up to you. I'll take him at his word. Whatever profession, he says writing is his second career, but whatever his profession is, this is a darn good book. Whatever his credentials may be. Now, I'm not so fond of the title, guinea pig. It sounds so generic and it's a kind of a cliche. But get beyond that. The subtitle is called Technologies of Control. We'll get back to this book in a moment. Before I start, though, if I may make a brief digression, I have indeed been to Oklahoma City and have visited the memorial and the museum that was erected not exactly on the footprint, but on that site. And I only visited once. I was there for only a half a day, but I would have to say that it's very, very well done memorial, right? So I feel less guilty for being a dark tourist than some other places I've been to, which I rationalize for myself, well, I'm doing this for historical research. But then I have to question, am I just one of these morbid curiosity seekers? I'm always wondering about this, about myself. What are my motives? Do I just want to shock myself, or I'm still trying to figure it out. But I'll have to say that the memorial and the attached the memorial's outside. It's a sculpture. I'll show you a video in a moment. It's a sculpture garden outside, but there's a separate building that has the museum. If you've been there, let me know what you think about it down there. It doesn't have to be a long essay. Just let me know. But it's very moving. I had the same sensation in visiting for the first time many, many years ago, the Vietnam Veterans Wall in DC. A very moving experience. And I guess I'd have to put that on my dark tourist list site, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall, upon which over 50,000 names of Americans are inscribed, people who lost their life in the what's called in the US American War in Vietnam. They call it the American War. And I visited their museum in Hanoi. And these are sacred to me. They're not presented as such because these are public facilities, but to me, they have a sacred mission of memory and memorialization that shall not be trespassed upon. And this was before the age of cell phones, thank goodness, when I first went to the Oklahoma City Memorial, and prior to that, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. So everybody was silent and respectful. Even the young, this is no knock against young people, but I was a stupid teenager myself, and I misbehaved a lot in very inappropriate circumstances. Um, but everybody was respectful, even the children at these sites. Contrast to that, and I wasn't there, but I heard reports that at the recent viewing of the recently deceased Pope's body, people were taking selfies, and some of them were smiling. My gosh. Oh, that never would have occurred to me, but of course, people would be doing that. It didn't occur to me, but it wasn't a shock when I read about. Anyway, I don't wanna get too far into it. I'm just saying that the politics of terror doesn't have to remain in our hearts and our minds and our understanding as a lost cause. The politics of memorialization and love will win out over the hatred and the deviousness and the pure evil that is perpetrated by forces that, ironically, that we put trust in. We think these psycho killers are drooling, sweaty, suspicious looking individuals crawling around every corner in the movie theater or at the mall. Yeah, there's some like that. But the real nasty ones are wearing business suits and ties. They're white collar workers. Many of them think they're just doing their bureaucratic functions. They have no compunction about the type of work that they're doing. Well, I'm not going to moralize at this point. Let's just take a look at the circumstances of the event, 1995.
I'm Tammy Payne in the TV9 newsroom. If you are anywhere downtown, you probably heard it and felt it. An explosion of some kind downtown Oklahoma City. Take a look at this picture. This is our tower cam shot, a plume of smoke rising in the air. I was on the phone with one of the fire chiefs, John Hanson, just moments ago. We were talking. He said, wow, there's been some kind of explosion in downtown Oklahoma City. The minute he said it, we felt what I guess is some type of aftershock, maybe a second explosion that we felt all the way here at Wilshire and Kelly at Newsline 9. This is a live picture right now, downtown Oklahoma City. Robin, have you got some more information?
They're just saying that it was near the YMCA, and apparently there are numerous injuries, just so you have that.
Initial reports, numerous injuries. These are initial reports coming into Newsline 9. Again, a live picture, tower cam, downtown Oklahoma City. It is our understanding the explosion was near the YMCA. Now, we're going to stay with you here for a few moments.
Maybe the federal.
Well, that's a live report, but obviously, as we learned later, the facility that took the brunt of the shock was the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. And on the, I think it was the first floor, was a child care facility. And a lot of children were killed. This is at 9:01 roughly a.m. So they're all there. Their parents had dropped them off. So let's take some more, another view here. If I see anything with really gory or with children, then I'll stop it. I think these images are okay for, I don't want to trigger anybody, including myself. It was horrible. I think the final death toll, if the numbers mean anything to you or are important, because I get nitpickers on here, I think it was 169 dead. Many more injured, of course. Another source said 168. So don't ding me below if you say, no, it was 167. You're missing the point.
The nation had only digested and come to terms with the horrific events at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, and the events at Waco, Texas, when the news broke about the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, on April 19, 1995, which was the second anniversary of the fiery end to the Waco siege. What led to the Oklahoma City bombing? Who was responsible? What was the result of this event?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
The primary culprits were Timothy McVeigh, Michael Fortier, and Terry Nichols. They all met at Fort Benning, Georgia in 1988 and became friends. Both McVeigh and Nichols were radicalized by white supremacist and anti-government propaganda and were angry at the federal government's handling of the 1992 standoff with Randy Weaver and his family at Ruby Ridge, as well as the 51-day Waco siege the following year. In fact, McVeigh visited the Waco site during the standoff in March 1993 and again after the siege was over. These events prompted him to plan on bombing a federal building in response. McVeigh believed that federal agents were no better than communists or Nazis and believed that any of their locations were legitimate targets, although he had considered assassinating several people, including Attorney General Janet Reno, FBI sniper Lon Horiyuchi, famed at Ruby Ridge and Waco, and former Attorney General Bill Barr, among others. McVeigh decided to have a mass casualty event. The more dead bodies, the greater the message. McVeigh and Nichols decided.
So this is obviously a mainstream report that was sent out to the American public, and this is where the bulk of the story resides for many, many people. But as you might expect, those of you who are here on the live stream or who are subscribers to this channel, and if you're not, please do subscribe right now while you're listening. Those of you who've been following my work know that there's much more to the story. And part of it was covered in a previous, I think it was the most recent talk that was based on this new book, The Ghosts of Iron Mountain. Remember the document, supposed to be a forgery, a spoof on the Cold War, called the Report from Iron Mountain. This is by a British journalist by the name of Phil Tinland, right? He's a, elite journalist. He's got all the earmarks of intelligence, believe me. I can see it. It's there. But he talks about Timothy McVeigh and the so-called Christian identity movement, white supremacists. Sound familiar? We keep hearing these tropes being floated right now with slightly different iterations. Because the media environment is being massaged for another big event. And again, they're going to pin it on the usual suspects. Now, by putting out talks such as this one here, we're pre-questioning. Hey, is that a good concept? We're pre-questioning the official story, the official scenario that's already being written out. It's already been scripted. It only needs to be implemented. They only need to find a Timothy McVeigh type character, someone with military experience, someone who had some disappointments in life, someone who has stated a certain ideological position. Maybe he said, oh, I just want to live with my own people out in a cabin out in Idaho. Right. And someone who's patriotic, someone who's committed, someone who can follow orders, someone who fits the psychological profile, someone like a Timothy McVeigh. In other words, his cohorts, they were all from the military. They all meant it, according to this fellow, at Fort Benning, Georgia. So this book here, which I had forgotten about, devotes an entire section to David Hoffman. So he has a copy. This guy, Philip Tinland. He has a whole section on the David Hoffman book. If nothing else, I want to revive interest in the David Hoffman book, because this apologist for the New World Order and MI5 and MI6 and SAS and all of it, and for the Nestle company, or some interests whose headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, is writing this book telling about how awful these Americans are, these Yanks, who were involved in all these crackpot right-wing extremist movements. And you're supposed to eat it up? I'm not. Watch this previous talk. I do a critique. Not as exhausted as I would like, but let me read a little bit from it. It says, by March 1998, David Hoffman's investigation had borne fruit, yielding a book called The Oklahoma City Bombing. You know the title. This account won some strikingly good reviews. One appraiser judged, quote, it's a convincing compilation of federal blunders, red herrings, half-truths, and evasions. It would even win high praise from one of America's famous writers. And he's alluding to, so far as the famous writer is concerned, Gore Vidal. Gore Vidal had a jailhouse correspondence with Timothy McVeigh. And Gore Vidal questioned the official story. And he was a journalist who was acceptable, Gore Vidal, by the publishing establishment. And he published frequently in The Nation. It was a weekly magazine of opinion, journal of opinion magazine. It was printed on cheap paper. I know, I was a subscriber. Remember, that's my world. So Gore Vidal, so it's very difficult for the establishment to just dismiss the whole Oklahoma City bombing as the result of all these crazy rednecks who are living out in Idaho, their own private Idaho, right? Who are following some sort of crazy crackpot Christian minister, right? There's a very heavy anti-Christian fundamentalist thrust here, right? Which is also part of the, not surprisingly, the ADL MO. And I mentioned them, the Anti-Defamation League, because according to Hoffman and Thorne, not surprisingly, they play a large role in some of the stories that are circulating about the Oklahoma City bombing. All right. So, in the interest of time, let me. Oh, by the way, before I move ahead in the story here, please support me on Patreon. It allows me to obtain books like this. This is called American Prometheus. It's a biography by Kai Bird, K-A-Y, Bird, prominent historian. It's about J. Robert Oppenheimer, right? My colleague at the University of California. I'm kidding. He predeceased me. And by the way, not so coincidentally, Kai Bird writes the introduction to The Ghosts of Iron Mountain, a piece of MI5 propaganda talking about all the white extremists that are running around in the wilds of America and in the cities now. People in other countries probably think America is like the Wild West of people carrying M16s ready to shoot all kinds of people of any color. Because that's the message that we're being hit with, as well as overseas. CNN, for example, that's all they play to foreign audiences. That's why I have a very high number of viewers from foreign countries here, because they want to bypass the BS and get the real information. So anyway, I just mentioned this in passing about the Manhattan Project, because since we're talking about, at least in passing, dark tourism, I visited the Trinity site, where one of the initial experiments, proof of concepts, took place. And I went there on the 50th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, and a couple days later, Nagasaki, both of which I have visited. Again, I'm a dark tourist, right? You heard the story. I've lived outside of Hiroshima. I used to go there twice a week. Right, but I went to Trinity, and there were thousands of people at the anniversary as well. I'll leave that for a separate talk. It was a very strange experience there. But in order to get there, there's a little trail out in the middle of the desert. It's called Jornada de Muerte, the Journey of Death. That's the name of the place. Okay, and then Los Alamos is not that far away. Same with the Santa Fe Institute, where Jeffrey Epstein used to hang out. And remember, he had Zorro Ranch in New Mexico. This is the late Jeffrey Epstein. So New Mexico is a very interesting place. I've been there more than a few times myself. So let's move to more familiar territory. And this is how the Oklahoma City bombing most likely intersects with your base of information, because who was one of the experts, so-called psychiatrist by training, medical doctor, who was one of the psychiatric experts to visit Timothy McVeigh while he was in jail? He was eventually executed, by the way, McVeigh. He manned up all the way to the end. He did not crack. He did not make a statement. He went to his death like a soldier, right? Like an American patriot. I'll answer my own question. It was none other than Dr. Jolyon Lewis West, otherwise known as Jolly West. That should ring a bell with you. He always seems to be wherever there's some sort of sensational, inexplicable, gory crime has been committed. Whether that's assassination of Robert F. Kennedy and Dr. West's interview of one Sirhan Bishara Sarhand. I think he also interviewed Jack Rubenstein, also known as Jack Ruby, the person who gut shot Lee Harvey Oswald. His whole resume is here. Jack Ruby. Let's see here. Some other names that you'll remember. Anyway, I don't want to waste too many. You get the point. He's the psychiatrist that they send in, they meaning the intelligence agencies, to clean up, make sure the programming has taken hold. Right. Let's see what he looks like, Jolyon West. There's not a lot of material on him on TubeView. It's probably been scrubbed. But I will tell you, for you researchers out there, most of his papers, not all, but most of his papers are at the UCLA Library Special Collections. But you do have to be a certified academic or journalist in order to get access, because you have to arrange to have them brought out so that you can look through them. But they're there. The papers are there. And I have some copies of them that have been released. Maybe I'll put them out here on Patreon. Make some interesting reading. But that's not enough to do any articles or books about. But you get to see what he was very prolific. He left a big paper trail. Here's Jolly West, Dr. Jolly West.
That we realize that cults like
Sorry, the volume's really low, but you get to see him.
type of human organizations are not static. They're groups of people and they're constantly changing. Some groups that began as one thing end up as something else. There are cults that ended up as successful industries, like the Oneida colony or the Amana colony. And there are some organizations that began with the best intentions, like Synagogue, that evolved into a cult because of the corruption by the leader of power. As Lord Acton put it 100 years ago, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if power accrues.
Jolyon West. By the way, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it, but I always thought he was a Gentile, West. But he's actually second generation parents of Jewish immigrants from the Ukraine. All right. That seems to be a pattern. Kiev, Odessa, right? It's part of a larger diasporic population here that has managed to gain a foothold within this complex of intrigue. That's Jolyon West. I don't know what his birth name is, but he's not a goy. He's not a goyim like you and me. He's not a cattle person. He's a psychiatrist. And psychiatry is a science itself. It comes from this hothouse intellectual environment of Berlin or Vienna, migrating, of course, to London and New York and San Francisco. So he's part of the second generation diaspora, Jolly West. That's how I view it. And this is where possibly the ADL connection might be invoked. So anyway, this is just speculative on my part. But I did find out in certain reading that he's an apostate, of course. He's turned away from Judaism. He has nothing to do with. He has nothing to do. He's turned himself over. He turned himself over to Satan. Maybe he was a Sabbatean, Frankist. I don't know. That's something that needs to be explored, but it won't be explored by Kai Bird or any of these mainstream historians. It'll only be these connections here, the metaphysical, the occultic part, will only be explored by people like you who are listening to this talk, who are going to be motivated to delve in the metaphysical foundations of what made a Jolyon West, or what the metaphysical foundations of what created a Sirhan Bishara Sirhan. And I refer you to a talk I gave quite a while ago on the Rose Parade, which I called the Rosicrucian Parade, Pasadena. That's the headquarters of Rosicrucianism. And where did Sirhan Bishara Sirhan live? He lived in that area, and he was studying Rosicrucianism. What are they involved with? I don't know, because I'm not a Rosicrucian, but their study, a lot of it has to do with mind control and metaphysics and the occult arts, the dark arts. All right, but that's not going to come from your mainstream reporters. It's going to have to come from a cultural forensics perspectives, which considers everything from the hard science. This is what the guinea pigs is about. This guy's a medical doctor himself. The hard science as well as the speculative arts and sciences. All right, let me continue. You probably know this, but when McVeigh was arrested, he complained that his butt hurt. Not that he was, feeling sad or insulted, but literally his butt hurt. There was, because he said something was implanted in his ass. And I don't know if it was ever pulled out of him, but supposedly he was a microchip. And that's where this book comes into play. Technologies of Control. He has a whole section on the mind doctors, Jolly West. He's been written about ad nauseum. I mean, you watch Joe Rogan, Jolyon West, mind control, UCLA, Neuropsychiatric Institute. That's where he worked. He was the head of it. You all know that. But now it's just become entertainment. It's become unreal. It's become pop music, right? Little Richard was the person who sang a Tutti Frutti. But who did they get? Who did RCA? Who did the CBS level entertainment and media people get to put it over on the American public? Not no gay, homosexual black man named Little Richard Penniman. He claims he's Jewish. His name's Penniman, not Little Richard. Richard Penniman. No, they took out Richard Penniman's hand and they gave it to Pat Boone. He sang Tutti Frutti on Rudy, Tutti Frutti. And that's how he got into Middle America. See how it works? Do you understand? And when you're just about to sign a big contract, like the guy who runs Club Shay Shay, they will take you down. Cat Williams warned him that was going to happen. You get too big for your britches, and you'll wind up in stitches at the Southern District of New York courts and in the jail down there. And your name is Sean Combs. And your jailmate is Samuel Bankman-Fried. All right. So he talks about Dr. Hall, or he doesn't go by doctor, but he says he's a medical doctor. John Hall talks about, he refers to it as miniaturized telemetrics, right? And this is all part of the electronic EMF control that's being installed as we speak to cover all of us now, not just targeted individuals, but the entire population. And it might not even have to be implanted. They might be able to do it via Neuralink, like Elon Musk is attempting to do with his satellites up there, but they might be able to do it remotely and create these assassins. We know it as the Manchurian Candidate. I didn't want to use the term because then people shut off. And I said, oh yeah, I've seen that movie. And you probably didn't even see that movie. You saw the one by Jonathan Demme, the remake of the original. You got to watch the original by John Frankenheimer, right? It's just like Little Richard, Tutti Frutti taken out of his hand, put to Pat Boone. The Manchurian Candidate taken from Richard Condon, the author, handed to John Frankenheimer. So far, so good. He was for real, Frankenheimer, and then put into Jonathan Demme's hand and do a remake of it. And that's all the memory you have. When I say Manchurian Candidate, you're going to default to that version of the picture of the book. All right. Let's take a brief moment to look at the memorial site of the Oklahoma City bombing victims.
It stands for something, and today we need more things that stand for something.
To me, you have to come to the museum to understand the memorial because it's a tremendous experience.
It's very truthful. The whole storyline I thought was very well done.
You see that they were actually people, that 168, that number represents 168 lives. It really brings home just the humanity.
The museum tells a story about people that look a lot like you and me.
I really learned a lot more from like the survivor and the victim's perspective.
Just being able to put the story with it now and really to look back at how far we've come was incredible.
There's so many things that are interactive, and we're just living in a time when that's what kids love to do. The museum has really gotten that particular part of what a kid loves to do, and it's made it into a very impactful learning experience.
I like the interactives, I like the videos. The videos tell a lot. It makes you feel what people are feeling and see how they react. It's good.
The crime scene began the moment that it happened, and the investigation began the moment it happened.
Growing up, of course, we learned about it, and I heard about it, and then actually coming here to the museum and seeing everything firsthand, just wow.
The biggest enemy is ignorance. The museum, it fights ignorance, it educates.
It just completely puts a new perspective on it. At some point in your life, you have to come through.
Everybody has to come see it. It's a story that needs to be told. And it's a story that needs not be forgotten so that there's a better tomorrow.
Well, that's the heartwarming promotional for the museum and for the site. And I'm not denigrating it, but as you have heard today, there's much, much more to the story. And these are the files that I'm really interested in reading from the FBI. And that even then, that's not going to be the complete story. I think the first hurdle, and it's I think it's been overcome by a large percentage of the American population. The largest hurdle to overcome is skepticism about whether people who are working in official capacities are capable of planning and executing such large-scale devastation as this. But I'll repeat again, I think a large percent of the American public is getting to that point. And it didn't get there by accident. It got there through the living sacrifice of people like Victor Thorne or of David Hoffman. I don't even know if he's still alive. I know the founder of Feral House is dead. I think his name's Adam Parfrey. If David Hoffman, if you know him, or if he, please leave a message here. I'd like to interview you and talk about the genesis of this book and the suppression of it, and moreover, its implications for 2025. Because we very well could be heading for another big wedding, as it was called. 9/11 was the big wedding in code. We don't want to see it, but we don't want to be caught on the back foot either and always reacting. We want to anticipate. By the time you see the sword coming towards you, it's already too late. You have to anticipate the stroke. But that comes through practice. That comes through experience. That comes through cultivating certain talents and skills and perceptions. Some of them drawn from the uncanny world of free knowledge, of psychic, of psi, if you will, that the empiricists haven't been able to quantify. But nonetheless, that's how we not just survive, but we endure and prevail over these processes. We're still going through them now. And it's big question mark whether we are going to pull through it. But we certainly are not going to prevail if we have a bunch of weeping willies, right? Milquetoast, defeatists, emotional skeptics, whatever you want to call them. You might as well give up. Dig yourself a hole in the side of the road and just climb in it and roll over in it and let history pass you by. You'll still get the dirt thrown over you, but you would have lost any sort of sense of who you are as a human being. Many people will take that option. All right. We have our work cut out for ourselves. I'm going to save the discussion of dark tourism for a future date. I'll talk about the suicide cliff at the Battle of Okinawa that I visit. I visit their war museum. And I'm sure there's all different types of sites I haven't really thought about. I'm kind of sitting back and reviewing and writing down all the different dark touristic sites that I have visited. There's a lot of them. And it's a minor industry. And it goes by the unfortunate name of dark tourism. I would prefer to call it memorialization. And it's become monetized. It's become a source of revenue for certain governments. They have a prison. I haven't been to it, a prison in Cambodia where you can see the skulls of all the people that were killed during Pol Pot time. And on and on. There's probably a reason why I avoided that one. I don't want to be that guy who's taking a smiling selfie in front of a dead body lying in state. That's not me. What is me is the study of history and the sharing of and the pooling of information that we're gathering together so that we might improve on our situation ever so slightly. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Subscribe to this channel. Get me up to 100,000, right? And we'll move from there. We'll see you next week on Sunday, God willing. Thank you again. Bye.